of webinars on sustainability in lighting. Today's event is organized by Recolight, the lighting industry's leading authority on sustainability and compliance. I'm Ray Molony. I'm the editor of Circular Lighting Report, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour and a half or so. Now, today's webinar is entitled Remanufacturing, the Success Stories. So today we're going to be focusing on those projects where luminaires were saved from the waste stream by either upgrading them, reconditioning them, or remanufacturing them. And we're going to see how they all achieve their clients' goals in terms of the lit environment, sustainability, and costs, etc., etc. Now, we have an excellent lineup of speakers as usual. As you can see, our panel today are David Clements, who's the CEO of FutureDesigns, John Bowden, who's the company owner at Silent Design, Simon Fisher, he's the founder and director of the Regen Initiative, Sacha Abizadeh, who is the head of architectural lighting at WSP, and also joining the panel later is the CEO of Recolight, Nigel Harvey. Now, today's agenda, first up is David, who is going to walk us through a large remanufacturing project at the Shell building in Waterloo. Next, John will discuss the refurbishment of the Lancaster West Estate in North Kensington here in London, and the Design Works, which is a social project also in London in Harleston. Then Simon will show us no fewer than 3 different projects, including Alexandra Palace in North London, Arup in London again, and a school in Yorkshire. And finally, Sacha will explore a recent scheme in Westminster in which the addition of intelligence resulted in a 67% reduction in running costs. So quite a variety of projects to look at there. Presentations will be followed by a panel discussion, and here at this point we welcome your thoughts, your comments, your questions. So please participate and engage with us. That'd be great. The webinar will be an hour and a half with a finish at 12:30 p.m. Now, today's session is being recorded as usual, and it will in due course appear on the Recolight website, so you can listen again at your leisure. You will also get a link to that recording tomorrow. You'll receive the slides as well via MailChimp, so keep an eye out for them. And of course, check your spam folder if you don't see them by the end of play tomorrow. My colleague Suzanne is taking care of the chat box. So if you have any technical or other issues about the webinar, put them in there, and Suzanne will do her best to assist you. Please put questions and comments in the Q&A box. Sorry, Suzanne, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I've got a few people saying that they can't hear any sound, but Marcella's just come back and say she can hear us, so bit of a worry, but
okay.
Hands up if
So
else
yeah, please put in the chat box if you can hear us. That would be pretty helpful. Now, if you want any questions or comments for the actual discussion, please put those instead in the Q&A box. And I say this because I'll be looking at the Q&A box during the event and putting those questions and comments to the panel. But before we actually kick off, I want to put a few future events on your radar. First of all, our next webinar is on bioplastics, and that is going to be at 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 20th of June. Now, here we'll be looking at whether bioplastics stand up to scrutiny as material for luminaire housings, components, optics, etc., etc. And we have some great speakers who are in this whole 3D space, including Jamie Norris-Green, who's the founder of Luminad, Mark Shortland, who's the managing director of Shoplight, and Julienne Vassiri, who is the CEO and founder of Batch.works. So there's loads happening in that space, and there's a lot of people experimenting with bioplastics. So if you're a manufacturer, I suggest you join us. And of course, as usual, it's free to register, etc. Just hit the Recolight website and follow the links. Now, on Thursday, 27th of June, Simon will deliver a 1-day in-person workshop at the Business Design Centre in London on remanufacturing. And thank you to Tridonic for hosting. So Simon, these workshops get great feedback. People really get a lot of value out of them. And so this one, he's going to look at the design principles, he's going to look at compliance, and he's also going to look at the implications of the new draft standard on remanufacturing, BS 8887.221. There are still places remaining, so to ensure your place, head to the Recolight website again and just click on the links. In our next event, we're delighted to announce the program for this year's Circular Lighting Live has been unveiled. If you're not familiar with this event, it's a one-day conference and exhibition. It's our flagship event, and we believe is the UK's biggest event dedicated purely to sustainable lighting. It takes place this year at the Royal College of Physicians in London, Wednesday, the 9th of October. And the good news is that there are early bird bargains to be had if you get in, and bona fide specifiers go free as usual. So that is and there'll be an exhibition alongside with lots of interesting kit, sustainable luminaires and all that type of thing. So we're really excited with the program. We've got some really top-notch speakers, so keep an eye out for that. Circular Lighting Report, as I said earlier, I'm the editor of the Circular Lighting Report. Now this is a guide, latest developments in sustainable and circular lighting. This is where you can learn all about the people and the products and the projects and the processes that are shaping our industry's low carbon future. There's lots of news stories, opinion pieces, video reviews, and lots of other good stuff about sustainable lighting. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn and see our daily posts. And Cat-A lighting campaign. This is a lighting industry initiative to put pressure on the real estate world to take the issue of waste from Cat-A strip beds seriously. Okay, next slide, please, Suzanne. Yeah, so there are, you know, these days there are credible alternatives to Cat-A installations. And on the website, there are about a dozen success stories, you know, where waste has been either been minimized or eliminated altogether. So please take a look. There's the main title there, and you can support the campaign by signing the pledge. And it was great to see so many people sign the pledge yesterday. Right, on to the business. I'm going to hang over to David to kick us off. David.
I wholeheartedly agree with your statement about, like, you know, reusing light fittings, because you know, there's so much energy involved in, you know, making steel and making aluminium, and that's the important part. Whereas you know, if you refurbish, yeah, it's absolutely brilliant, and people need to sort of, I feel, sometimes take their personal ambitions out the way maybe sometimes and just go, do you know what, we've got these light fittings, let's see what we can do with them. It's going to look the same on the project, but it's going to save so much energy, it's going to save the planet, and that's what we all really need to do. So I'll get off my high horse now and talk about some projects. So we got involved in a project, Lancaster Estate, West London, and it's basically, it's part of the Grenfell Estates. Yeah, so Grenfell Tower is just to the left of this image, actually. So it's a big sort of social housing estate. There's 3 buildings, large buildings, multi-tiers. And if we have the next slide. So what happened is the fire service went round and they found that the emergency light levels weren't quite up to standard, which is obviously quite important given, you know, the gravitas of Grenfell. And also, so that needed to be rectified. And then also the lights were running 24/7. They were very old, well-built design plan lights. So they had a 1x58 watt T8. In the majority of cases, there were different sizes. So on this project, all we wanted to do first was just to retrofit the lights, to upgrade them to LEDs, put new emergency gear in, and actually give them microwave detectors, so they give presence detection and have daily dimmable gear, so they could all dim down to certain things, certain levels. So if we have the next slide. So this is what it looked like next to the old T8 light fittings. So that one in the middle there, that light in the middle, it's retrofitted. It looks quite cool, but it's actually a 4000 Kelvin light. It's just the way the camera works. You can see what we put in there. We put Zaga compliant LED boards so they can be replaced in the future, daily dimmable driver, integrated dimmable microwave sensor, and we've put in an emergency pack with a 6-watt lithium iron phosphate emergency pack. So it's ultra long life and it's ultra high output. So that was the kind of the way, you know, forward, because we just knew if we'd put in a 3-watt emergency pack, it might not have done all the deeds. As you can see, there's multiple finishes on the floor, on the ceiling, on the walls, and it was very hard to sort of get a virtual calculation on emergency light output. If we have the next slide, please. So the lights are set to presence at 100%, and then after 5 minutes they dim down to 10%, and then after 5 minutes they go off, which is quite nice. And hopefully Suzanne can play a video if that's possible. Or no, can you go back? Does that video play, Suzanne? Oh, look at that. No, does it play? No, okay. It's got a guy walking up the stairs, and as soon as he gets onto the second step, the light comes on at full brightness. Okay, that's what it does anyway in practice. All right. And this project it actually achieved a lot of energy savings. You know, I mean, this is just the emergency lights, bear in mind. So we're not even touching the standard output lights at the moment. So the graph on the top left here shows you how much roughly it was costing in terms of lights and install. All right. So that's the initial investment in the yellow, and then the energy savings from year 1 to year 5. And it was huge. I mean, kilowatts of energy saved per year, 20 kilowatts. You know, monetary savings, £80,000, you know, a year, you know, on running costs alone, you know, and then kilograms from skip, because they were all very heavy, vandal-proof, well-made design plan fittings. They're about 10 odd kilos each, you know what I mean? So it was a lot of, we say 5 tons of waste basically from a skip, which is amazing. And then all those savings on the right-hand side equate to, you know, we saved 2,000 trees, carbon emissions, you know, from upgrading from fluorescent to LED, and 29 cars off the on average running a year. So, you know, that's kind of based on with the little descriptions at the bottom of each thing, based on assumptions, obviously. But that project for us was just, it was a simple project, but it just shows you if you've got old heavy fittings, the savings can absolutely be massive. Do you know what I mean? And it's really, so I was quite humbled to be on this project, to be honest, because obviously with Grenfell and everything else, and it just worked really, really well. You know, with the high output LEDs, we surpassed the emergency lighting levels, absolutely smashed them. You know, we smashed the carbon savings, we smashed the weight savings. It was a brilliant project to be involved in. But again, it's very simple. Do you know what I mean? It's nothing, no complicated controls, nothing, you know, nothing crazy. It was just a very sort of simple retrofit job, and that was all done on site. So we provided the LED gear trays, and the electricians did all that retrofit on site, because to transport all that 5 tons of waste to our offices and then 5 tons back again it wasn't going to happen. So we just did all the retrofit on site with the electricians. So that was a great project to be involved in. Next slide, please, Suzanne. So this is a small little job. I just wanted to mention it because not all projects are about money, really, and this kind of exemplifies that. So basically, we were called in by a refurbishment company which takes old bits and pieces from old buildings, and this one happened to be 25 Canada Square in London and Canary Wharf. And they said, "Look, here you go. We've got a load of these suspended up-down lights from Schmidt's. Do you want them?" And I was like, "Okay, all right. There's only about 20 of them." I was like, "Fine, we'll have those. I can use those on other projects." If we have the next slide, what actually turned up was those lights plus these rather large, very wide suspended light things. These are all steel, so they're very, very heavy. And I was like, "Oh, okay, thanks for that." So we transported those back to our offices, and I didn't really know what to do with them. So it was kind of like a bit of an odd one, because they're, you know, quite large, quite specialist, continuous run sort of things. What we just held on to them basically until we had an inquiry, and someone came up about 6 weeks ago, and they said they've got the social off place in Hulls run by Brent Council. They've got a space. They basically do a drop-in centre for NHS. They do some homeless bits and pieces. They've got the space for they have business startups, which is really cool. So all this space they've donated for business startups, and they've put all this furniture in there. So they've got nice new desks and the black and white chairs you'll see there. And they've got these old fluorescent lights, and they also suffered from a bit of a sound problem. It was quite echoey in there. Yeah. I was thinking, do you know what? This is perfect for those lights, because not only are they the right size, but they can also, because they're quite large, they'll dissipate the sound throughout the room. They'll break up the sound in the room. So I thought, you know what, we've got a perfect thing for this. And I was like, do you know what? I'm not going to be able to sell these. We'll just give them away. So if we have the next slide, basically we made up some black, we cut them all down, not cut them down, we basically stopped them from being continuous run. We made some nice new black end caps to match the furniture. So it's black end caps with white light fittings, which was pretty cool. So it matches the furniture. Tested everything obviously to the relevant standards, and delivered them. And it was only from Canary Wharf to our offices and then back to Housen was only 76 miles. So very sort of low carbon sort of project. It's only, I think there's only about 15 light fittings there roughly. So you know, they look the part. If you go to the next slide, so that's them installed or being installed. And you can see it just changes the way the space looks. It's very modern. Like I say, it actually works with the sound as well, so it's really cool. So it breaks up the sound on the space. And if they wanted to, they could stick some carpet to the sides of those and reduce the sound even further. So it was kind of like a match made in heaven, really. I couldn't believe it. And it was just, you know, it's a nice little project to get involved with. Again, you know, no money changed hands. It was just, we had stuff, quite happy to, you know, spend a little bit of time on it and do it for a nice little project. And that's, you know, sometimes I think what we should all try and strive to do sometimes. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pass over to Simon.
Thanks, John. I love the way that, you know, John and David are highlighting the absolute kind of breadth of scale of potential for remanufacturing. And I'm going to kind of showcase that a little bit further, really, and take you on a little journey from the sublime to the ridiculous in 3 projects. But just a few words on the Regen initiative. There's a collaboration really between my business FMark that fundamentally looks after design and engineering of the remanufacturing process, and with Coco Lighting, who have a fantastic setup where they can make, they can test, they can photometer, they can, you know, warrant and do all that kind of commercial sales element. But as we come together, then we deliver remanufacturing solutions at project level, and we do a lot of work kind of at the front end to really understand, you know, the metrics by which we're kind of judged on projects moving forwards. So looking at the next slide, then we really, we try on every project to gather a sample light fitting, every light fitting that's kind of hopefully going to be subjected to the remanufacturing process. And we want to do that for a number of reasons. And the first and foremost, of course, is to calculate carbon and try and understand the carbon handprint of remanufacturing existing lights over replacing with new. Obviously, we can calculate the energy benefit associated with that conversion, understand the amount of waste that we're preventing from entering the WEEE process and the e-waste stream. But fundamentally, we want to be able to make sure that we're delivering kind of confidence to our clients in the compliance of any product that we touch and remanufacture. And one way we do that is by taking the existing fitting from site whenever it's possible to do so. We'll subject that to a photometric test to make sure that we understand what our baseline is or what the benchmark photometric performance is. And once we've converted the luminaire, not only are we going to re-photometer that product to make sure that we're in a comparable or a better solution than the original incumbent product, but also we can subject that to other regulatory compliance to make sure, for instance, that thermally and electrically we're completely safe and sound. And that product becomes the kind of master product, as it were, or the golden sample by which products are then converted on site. And lastly, you know, we should pay a bit of attention. We found most of the projects we worked on are point-for-point replacements, but it's quite important at the kind of design phase to understand whether there's potential change of use as well. And if that's the case, it may be also an opportunity to redesign the space or format the space in a different way so that we're not actually using as many light fittings, for instance. So the first project I want to talk about is probably from our perspective is the kind of cream of the crop. So we're working with Arup in London to remanufacture virtually every light in that building, and it's multiple manufacturers, with linear solutions, with downlights, with wall washers, with pendant fittings, and working directly with Arup, but also their partners CBRE to that are going to undertake the installation phases. And we literally took every light fitting. We designed what the retrofit and what the remanufacture was going to be, and then as a golden sample, actually converted every single product and went through that process I described earlier of photometry testing, proving the numbers, and actually the net result was that we converted. We're in the process of converting about 1,900 luminaires. We're saving, just flip to the next slide, please, Suzanne. We've saved somewhere in the region of 53% energy out of the gate, although that looks like it's heading north towards about 70% now that the daylight linking has all been commissioned by Simtronic. So that number is going to go north. We've calculated the carbon handprint and the CO2 that we've avoided consuming by installing new light fittings. And as you can see from John and from David, we're finding innovative ways of kind of demonstrating in real world terms what that means. So from our perspective, we treat that as kind of plastic water or Coke bottles, and how many of those we've effectively avoided producing in that regard. And actually the most stunning sort of statement on this slide really is the fact that it's the 92% of components and materials we've prevented from hitting that kind of recycle waste stream. So we're really proud of the project. But that's kind of not necessarily a typical project. So the East Riding Council, this is I believe it's a secondary school in Yorkshire. This is a more typical kind of remanufacturing project that we're seeing, local authority style work, where we are looking to remanufacture recessed fluorescent products to LED. So actually on this project, we ran a kind of the request was that we ran a kind of a dual project where we investigated the potential of reusing the louver and kind of creating an LED solution that kind of looked like fluorescent, as it were, and then also looking at the potential of removing and recycling the louver and replacing it maybe with something that was a bit more state of the art from using a micro prismatic diffuser. We produced and we tested both variations, and actually the carbon stack up meant that we retained the louver. In the end, the client made the decision to retain the louver because fundamentally we were saving 7 kilos of CO2 per luminaire by not removing and replacing with a plastic diffuser. And lastly, the final project that I have is kind of the ridiculous element, I suppose, is and kind of a demonstration that it's not all about doing conversions of office products, is that we're actually invited to look at remanufacturing grade 2 listed products at Alexandra Palace. And these were Son luminaires historically. As you might imagine, we weren't able to take one of these away from site and kind of do all that kind of rigor that I was talking about in my second slide. But we were able to and the image right in the middle there is me on top of a 40-foot container where several sort of damaged beyond repair products had been dumped over the years, and you know, we managed to get a good kind of look at and a good understanding of how the products were manufactured and how we might do that remanufacturing process. But one of the key requirements from the site was that we had to retain that that kind of sodium look. So we actually ended up generating bespoke LED boards that had 1800 Kelvin color temperature LEDs on them, so that once we'd converted the products, we absolutely maintained the look, the feel, the heritage, and maybe most importantly, the listed status of the building. So in the final slide, you sort of see some of the work we had to go to, you know, we did do the due diligence in terms of being able to kind of functionally test to make sure that our light was as good as it could be from the fitting. And I'm going to kind of close this piece with just a couple of interesting facts. Was throughout this process, you know, we managed to source new globes from a manufacturer that was less than 4 miles away from Alexandra Palace. And actually, we managed to also identify the original casting foundry for the original cast components. So should we find ourselves in a position where we actually have product that's damaged beyond repair, we could actually have gone to the level of, you know, replacing components with original cast components. So really nice project, but completely out of kind of the norm, but really a great pleasure to work on. So thanks for your time. I'm going to hand you over now to Sacha.
Hi everyone, thanks for that, Simon, very interesting. So today I'm going to share a project that we completed in the end of 2023 in Westminster. So you can see in the image here, this is a typical office on the right hand side, and these were the type of lights that we were changing to LED lighting. So following on to the next slide. So it all started off with a phone call from the client. They were querying about the ban of fluorescents that was happening in 2023, and then the phasing out of the fluorescent lamps in September. So the question quickly came, Sash, what am I going to do? Am I going to have to stockpile the fluorescent lamps to keep this going? Because of the pendant lights and the lights that we have are all bespoke. So question again from the client, how could we make existing luminaires in the office more energy efficient, relamping, reducing maintenance without changing the aesthetics and not noticeable in the office for the occupiers? Then another question came from the client. Why are the emergency battery packs being drained out after routine emergency checks and the lights turning pink? So I started scratching my head after listening to the client and seeing photos. I thought, well, this could be an amazing challenge. How could I replace all the lamps to LED, reduce carbon emissions of the building and make the client problems go away? So I said to myself, challenge accepted. So what we did in this image slides you see here, we went to the office, had a walk around with the client to actually get a grasp and a feel of the existing lamp types, luminaires, even switching on the switches, how they're switched on, switched off, get a feel for the circuitry in the building. And then as we were walking around, you can see on the left-hand side, the luminaire is being dependent on the left, was designed by the architect. So as you see, it's a fluorescent tube with a reflector that's coiled around the actual fluorescent. So you could say that the design of the pendant was designed around the fluorescent. So obviously this got me kind of thinking, oh, what am I going to be able to fit in there and keep the reflector intact? And then on the right-hand side is the staircase lighting, which is it's just a fluorescent batten recessed into the wall with an opal diffuser cover, and that's given the ambience and the light levels on the staircase. And this is where the battery packs were also recessed in the back in the wall, which were burning out because of the heat from the fluorescence. So that's some of the things that we found out. And then walking throughout the office, it was just so many different color temperatures range from 3,000 to 5,000 Kelvin. So that got me an opportunity of thinking, oh, we could unify the lighting here. So moving on to the next slide, we were able to get hold of OEM manuals, understand further detail in how the circuits were connected throughout the building, understand the distribution boards, where were they located on each floor, obviously, and then understand the total number of luminaires, the lamp types, and then within our scope, all the spaces included were cubicles, T-point areas, the exit signs, plant rooms, offices, multiple staircases. So literally, we kind of then identified what were we dealing with, not just the bespoke pendants, but it was the overall lighting throughout the building. Then we moving on to the next slide. Then we identified all the lamp types. So they had fluorescent lamps, high output, metal halide, and then it was then understanding what was the replacements in the market for these type of lamps. So we kind of started to do searching, researching, calling up the existing manufacturers. So to understand, did they had replacements? Did they had LED conversion kits? So as that went on, we realized that some of the manufacturers didn't have the equivalence of those fittings. Obviously, the project was completed about 14 years ago. So at that point, we started searching, ordering LED tubes from Sylvania, from Philips, and then speaking to local electrical stores, then understanding that there was also a shortage in the LED tubes, and they had to be pre-ordered. So we managed to get hold of 230-volt tubes, and then which required Dali relays for switching, and LED tubes that required transformers. We also spoke to industry leaders, as like Silent Designs, and we spoke to several UK manufacturers on retrofitting the existing lamps. We also, as I mentioned, contacted Whitecroft, Trilux, Thorn to see if they had conversion kits, but obviously their conversion kits wasn't suited, or they had different sizes and apertures. So as we move on to the next slide. So at this point, our initial research, the lighting team then sourced a UK manufacturer called DRK, and they would decrease the number. And by doing that, we just wanted to keep it with one manufacturer because we wanted to reduce the number of resources. And they would also support on site as well with the installation, which was really important as well, because we then started saying, you know, to get various different people involved, it was going to create more like CO2 emissions, and we wanted to have a smaller distance for the luminaires to travel back and from. So the manufacturer also promoted upcycling, remanufacturing, and not only energy efficient, but also low waste and sustainable solutions. So we thought, great, we've done our research, we've spoken to all the different industry experts. So at this point, when we went back to site several times to do tests, mock-ups, making measurements, taking samples, and then obviously samples sent back to DRK's workshop to test the solutions for upgrading existing fixtures, which everything was then, once it was all realized, all the install for retrofitting was all done on site. We then also reviewed the samples, making sure everything was looking aesthetically pleasing and well, and also the client to witness. So there was no huge changes. And as you can see, the wall light on the left-hand side in the image is literally the balustrade where we took the drivers out, we switched the drivers, we put new battery packs in. And then obviously the staircase is an old actual Zunto, it's a Thorn product where we just kept the luminaire housing intact and took the compact fluorescent out and then put a new LED strip inside with an opal diffuser. Obviously, it's slightly different to the previous one, but it's kind of giving it a better new look. So on that note, we also found out the DALI control had not been reprogrammed or commissioned, and the client wasn't aware that they had such a system that could have the potential opportunity for the luminaires to increase their lifetime, offering possibility of dimming, automatic switching, using presence detectors. So the DALI wasn't even fully commissioned. So that was another challenge that was great to have. We move on to the next slide. So after going through all of these changes, then we wanted to understand, right, we've made it to work electrically, we've changed the electronics, we've changed everything to LED. Then we wanted to create a comparison table to understand operating costs, CO2 emissions, and understand what the upgraded lighting was doing, what was the advantages of the LED-based installation. So using the LEDs, it decreased the maintenance requirements of the lighting system, and then the LEDs are obviously up to 5 times operational life than traditional light sources. So this also reduced the frequency of the maintenance. Having the control system connected now to the DALI with the LED luminaires, it also increased the lifetime, as I mentioned before. And then understanding circular economy and sustainability were also considered when we were doing this project, when selecting the LED replacements. So obviously we choose a UK-based manufacturer to decrease the amount of resources required. Also, the reduction of CO2 draw, and the manufacturers also, so yeah, moving on, hold on. So the WSP team provided consultancy services and project management to the client to retrofit the existing lighting with the upgrade of LED. And WSP then created a lighting strategy on how to replace all the lights throughout the office. It was a difficult task and a challenge because, as I mentioned, most of the light fixtures were bespoke and required specialist consideration. The existing manufacturers didn't have any kits or conversion kits, and the luminaires that were installed were almost like 13, 14 years old. But it was difficult, but we overcame it working together with suppliers and doing our research. So now the use of LED technology is also now working with the lighting control system. It's given now gives advantage of considering the power usage and the CO2 operating costs and sustainability. And it's now easier to maintain throughout the building. And the return on investment achieved is within about 2 to 3 years due to the upgrade and the LED lighting system. So as you can see here, originally the total power was achieving about 10,000, and then we reduced it, dropped it down to 4,000, and then it was offering roughly about power savings of 40% and reducing the annual cost of 67%. And by going through this exercise, we've now kind of reduced call outs for the client to get technicians or maintenance people in to do the relamping and do the switch changes. And having that successfully done, I think the client here is the person that we need to applaud, because they were obviously pushing for this and we were there to support them throughout the whole process. And now this is now leading us to new opportunities on other properties. So next slide. So I was kind of pretty much, the client just said they are really happy with what's happened. And in the past, they've had several electricians to come and do this and have failed. And luckily enough, we've managed to do it. So it's been it was quite a challenge, and it's different to my usual day-to-day work. So I definitely think retrofitting is kind of going to be the way forwards, with many installations are now being out of date and the way we are working now in our new offices. So thanks for that. Over to you, Ray.
Great, thanks, Sacha. It's very interesting. And if I could invite Simon, David, and John to turn on your cameras and your microphones, and Nigel Harvey as well, if you could join us. Nigel, you impressed with what you've seen?
Thank you very much. Can you see me okay there? Yep. No, I'm really, really impressed to see that. And what I loved was the numbers coming through. You know, like Simon's 69% reduction in embodied carbon. David, some of the numbers you talked about, the huge saving in steel and carbon. Really exciting to see, significant change happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's take some questions from our participants.
Hi, Ray, sorry, just before you start, can you see all of you on the screen? Because I can just see my name.
No, I can see everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, super.
Yeah.
Okay, just my
Even I'm back now.
Even David's in the room, so that's
Okay.
good.
Hi.
Right, let's say 6 questions. This is to you, John, from Marcel Batson Warner, and she is just asking about did the electrical tractors, did you hire those yourself on the Lancaster West project, or?
No, so the contractors were hired by the council themselves, so they were doing other works on the project, and they were, had a look at that project, and then they said, well, we'll do the install, you just give us the bits to do it with. So that's what we did. Yeah.
And you took them away and you worked on them in your workshop, or did you do them in situ?
No. So that was, like I said, it was about 5 tons of lights. So it would be ridiculous to sort of bring them all back to the office and then refurbish them and then send them back. So we just supplied gear trays, all pre-wired. So all they had to do was just take out the old fluorescent lamps, put on gear tray front and back for the gear and the LEDs, and where they went. So yeah, it's pretty easy from their point of view.
Okay, good. Question for Simon, also from Marcel. You didn't have any measure of actual cost savings beyond the energy savings. This is the ARP project, I believe. So she was wondering, do you have any sort of numbers on that?
Well, on ARP itself, we left that with ARP to work out. So we gave all the kind of carbon metrics and the energy benefits, and didn't necessarily get into, each individual customer telling us what price per kilowatt hour they buy their energy for and all that kind of stuff. So so we arm them with the tools to be able to then go and do those further calculations themselves.
Yeah, I think the question may refer to the capital cost versus the alternative of buying whole new luminaires.
Yeah, and I think it's the only kind of solid example we've got of that. Most of our projects have come. Thankfully, we've got kind of a client base that's kind of committed to the remanufacturing process, and I won't say regardless of cost, because actually some of the surveys we do, a valid answer is no, we're not doing this, right? Because it's for whatever reason, whether it's nasty stuff in the ceiling or the fittings are damaged beyond repair, or that the ability to say no is a very valid point of view. But a great example is a project where we were offering remanufacturing for about 120-ish pounds a light fitting, and our client was having to go back to the landlord of the building, who was doing floor by floor refurbishment, with a luminaire that was costing them 220 pounds each. So it doesn't always mean that the remanufacturing process doesn't always have to reflect a higher price, on delivery over purchasing new.
Okay, we'll come back to this topic in a bit. Let's take some more questions. Love Bhutan is asking, has any client bought off-the-shelf remanufactured or refurbished luminaires, and what prompted them? Was it sustainability or price? Good question. I'm not sure yes, I'm not sure you John, do you sell remanufactured, refurbished luminaires that you have in your stock?
Yeah, well, I've just started. Do you know what I mean? I've just started, but you need light fittings that are featured. Do you know what I mean? So, for instance, if I point there, see that one? That's an old Urco pendant, which is lovely. You know what I mean? And that actually, we've refurbished that, painted it, LED. That's quite nice. And then this one here, a lovely old, I think it was a 250-watt Son floodlight, but solid. It's like 8.5 kilos of aluminium. You know what I mean? So it's big piece glass, lovely. So retrofitted that, and that's what we'll be selling. So feature kind of stuff that can go into sort of more, you know, needs to be sort of suspended, or wall lights or stuff like that. Stuff that, you know, trouble is with lighting, unless it's sort of hanging below the ceiling, it's going to be quite difficult to sell because, you know, if it goes into a ceiling, you need to have a cutout, or, you know, you've probably got an existing cutout that needs to fit into. So there's always that kind of problem that you've got. So if it sort of sits outside the ceiling, it can be quite appealing to people. It just opens all those doors.
I think you know, the kind of example, David, that you gave, you know, it's kind of, you know exactly what you're going to go in and treat, right? So, you know, as a remanufacturer, because you're wholly responsible for that product in the first instance. And I think, yeah, arguably the lowest hanging fruit still is kind of office lighting or school education, healthcare, office are still kind of low hanging fruit with linear fluorescent. And the challenge there is just the complexity of ceiling conditions, you know, taking a product out of site A, you know, that's suitable for, you know, will only then be suitable for the same ceiling that it kind of came from. So, you know, I think that in time, I think they may well develop a market that kind of just stocks refurbished, remanufactured products for resale. But at the moment, I think it's still very project specific.
I agree with you, Simon. The issue is that logistically, to take a second-hand product out, to store it, keep it, awaiting perhaps someone like Sacha, or a consulting engineer, or an architect in FutureDesigns, say, oh, that's what I'm looking for, is remote, and storage, it financially isn't viable. And we have looked into this, and in the early days, I was talking to Nigel about, you know, the opportunity to look at space to store, but you're actually going to store scrap if you're not careful, because everything has to be fit for purpose. And generally, if you're taking out of a building to put it back into that building, the surroundings, whether that be the ceiling, the shape, everything else, it suits it. But I think we're a way off finding pioneers, if you like, to store what are second-hand products and used products, with the opportunity that one day you might be able to change that to LED. That personal opinion, but at the end of it, we still all run businesses, and there's a huge market out there you just made reference to it, Simon. Hospitals and schools is enormous. From the old PFIs that were produced, and we're working on several with several councils and what have you on schools at the moment, looking at this, because that will happen, but they'll be going straight back into where they came out of, is for the point I'm making.
David, just to add to that. Sorry, David, just to add to that, in fact, we are involved in a pilot project to provide some temporary storage space in London, working with in a consortium with the finishing and interiors sector, which might look to store carpet tiles and suspended ceilings and some fittings as well. And we're going to be very focused just on sort of fairly new LED 600 by 600 panels, and see if that works, and if creating a sort of a temporary storage space like that might undo the log jam that you just described. That would be a great solution.
Indeed, if that happens, that would be the start. And you know, from little acorns, the old cliche, but the fact is it has to start somewhere. But from a commercial point of view, there has to be somebody prepared to either gift space or be prepared to give it up for a period. But I know so well from my own factories and warehouses, every year we have the sort of cull where we're selling stuff off cheap to anybody that's sat on shelves that was wrongly ordered, and nobody wants it at the moment.
I should mention, I think Egg Lighting are the only company I know of who actually have reconditioned luminaires and then put them. I don't know what the quantities are, but they're the only company you can actually phone up and buy buy a
Right.
reconditioned product off the shelf. Yeah. Elias Kernbickler, who's a product manager of Tridonic, is asking about how did you manage on your projects the update of electrical and safety relevant installations like emergency lighting. Now, John, you did a whole emergency lighting, but Sacha and Simon and David, if you could, Sacha first on terms of the emergency lighting.
Yeah. So the emergency lighting, it was already intact. It was already working. It was literally, the emergency lighting was literally fixed onto right on the back of the balustrade of the fluorescents. So the emergency packs were burning, draining out because of the heat. So what we got around to it is obviously when we put the LED in, it was less wattage, less heat, resistant as well, that was going into the emergency pack. But then it was getting a qualified electrician to actually go through the certification and put in a new emergency battery pack that was like compliant, and then it was putting new electronic gear in, so there wouldn't have been no issue in the safety. It was still compliant, and it was handled with a capable lighting manufacturer that kind of had the test certificates able to prove it was working, and that. So pretty much that's how we overcame with the self-contained battery packs on the project.
And that's
David, do you have
very
any
much part,
issues?
part of the reason.
Sorry, Simon. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, it's very much part of the reason, Ray, why we, wherever possible, we try and take sample light fittings from site and do that kind of pre and post conversion piece of due diligence. So quite often actually we've seen quite a few projects where the emergency lighting has been that it's previously been integrated within the luminaire, has been sort of taken out into a standalone emergency solution because the spacings are better and it generally works out to be more economically beneficial. But where the emergency stayed within, then that's that piece of due diligence we do is to, and actually very last kind of column of metric of success is being able to kind of plug it in and test it from a lighting design and an emergency lighting perspective to make sure that you're still compliant with regulations.
And David, do you have any issues with emergency lighting on your projects?
No, generally we find that when emergency conversions per se are taking place within an existing, let's talk a 600 square, the lumen output from the LEDs are greater than it was out of a fluorescent. So for compliance and conformity, you tend to find that there isn't an issue with that. And if there is, then we tend to put additional ELEDs, as we call them, you know, the standalone LEDs within a tile within the ceiling to complement that if it's required. But generally, from the output you would get from a conversion kit on a fluorescent to new generation LED, it would be less on the fluorescent. So you're always on the better side of it.
Okay. There's a supplementary question for you, Simon. In the RF project, the actual remanufacturing, where did that take place? Was it on site?
The remanufacturing was done on site, yes. I know we've actually found the vast majority of the projects we've been working on have been in situ remanufacturing. So we do the due diligence with effectively the kind of golden sample. We deliver a package to the company that's doing the installation of kind of the scope of works, or the works instructions effectively of how to do the conversion. We're there on day one, night one to make sure that it's going correctly, and then they blow through the system.
So we have Lewis Smith, he's the managing director of SDA, saying, are there any of the guest speakers coming across issues of poorly manufactured products that prohibit remanufacturing? He'd also be interested to know if within the lighting industry's customers and their regulators, there is an increasing sense that they are becoming more willing to accept remanufactured luminaires, i.e. is the stigma reducing? He's just going to give some context and a very specific one within the airfield lighting sector. Generally speaking, an airfield luminaire's performance deteriorates over time. The opportunity exists to bring it back to where it should be, but there's a limit. Luminaire's performance has dropped by more than 50%, is deemed non-refurbishable. And I've not. Sorry, that's a separate question. Let's take this first one first about the quality of remanufactured luminaires from Lewis Smith.
Yeah, so it's a great point. I think I think I referred to it earlier. You know, no is a valid answer, right? In some cases, and whether that's just commercially it doesn't add up, or you know, you visit site and you've got you know, the dreaded LED flat panel that you know that actually is not designed to be taken apart. It's not designed for circularity. It's, you know, it's you just wish people luck and move on, right? So
it's not fit for purpose. It should never have been allowed into the country.
Yeah,
frankly.
I mean, you prefer an old school Cat 2 with heavy louvers, I presume.
Yeah, I mean, but what we're all trying to do here is to reuse rather than recycle, which is stealing something Nigel said to me when I first met him 2 years ago. And that's the fact of it. If you've got a flat panel fitting, which when it comes to end of life, it actually goes in the bin. Very few of them are built for serviceability and maintainability. So it's a false economy. Yes, you can buy them for 50 quid or 60 quid. And in our general day job of selling new products, which is still 80% of what we do, we still come up against the old, you know, the Chinese panel fitting. Oh, but I can buy one for £50. Well, good luck. You know, that's try and get your 7-year warranty on that. But if we change the thought process to staying with new products that are being made now, so everything, if you talk to Sacha, most of what's going on in offices now is suspended linear. It's become the fashion. Ceiling tiles are out and what have you. But the way we develop product now is so as it can see a second and third generation. It's inert, that the aluminium extrusion isn't going to change form. It's not going to rot. It'll need a new optic at some stage, and you can put a new gear train with LED, but you're saving digging that aluminium out of the planet. And if we can reuse more of what is existing, that has to be the way forward, rather than accepting, and it's corporate responsibilities of the big companies to say, and most of them won't entertain throwaway light fixtures once it's understood that, you know, there are downlights out there that you can't actually take apart unless you take a cutter to them, you know, so they can't be maintained.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, I'll come to this airfield question. So this is from Frank Thomas, who is a compliance manager at ATG Airports. And his question is, he wants to know, it's really about compliance. If the lighting industry's customers and their regulators, is there an increasing sense they're becoming more willing to accept remanufactured luminaires? To give some context, in airfields, if a luminaire deteriorates to more than 50%, it's deemed non-refurbishable in the airport world. And he doesn't know if this 50% is an exact science or a factor of safety. So have you come across any of that, anyone?
I've only come across it on some exterior lighting in a project in Fenchurch Street, where the gaskets had started to degrade. They were IP65 floodlights, but the carcasses, which were cast, there was nothing wrong with them. So it was possible to replace the glass and the gasket and create something that reached the IP rating of 6.5. So it's about if a product started to deflect or change shape where you can't get the seal, or if it's corroding. Once it's started to corrode, it will only get worse. But generally, glass degrades and gaskets degrade. They're the things that you have to, but they're replaceable. So anything like that is worth looking at. And as Simon said earlier, there is nothing wrong with saying, sorry, you can't do that. That's the fact of it. But as a business, if the gentleman, lady, I don't know who it was that sent that question, wants us to come and investigate the product, we'll we'll tell them, because we know what we're doing, whether it's suited to being reused or not.
I mean, that airport lighting generally tends to be that it's safety critical, right? Generally speaking, so that kind of buffer factor for non-refurbishment it just comes out of a need for it to be pretty much 100% fail safe. But I don't think there's any reason why you can't look at that to remanufacture.
I think it's a liability thing though. Like if you as a company have got to be willing to take that risk on, and if it doesn't, for some whatever reason, and something happens, an accident happens, and an airport, which I would say is pretty critical, apart from exterior lighting or office lighting, somebody might spill their coffee or something. But this is like serious stuff, and I would I don't think my insurance company would cover that, to be fair. So I think as manufacturers, I would say it's probably not part of their insurance policy for a start. So, but I mean, it'd be quite a serious sort of undertaking. I think that sort of for any remanufacturer to ever look at airport lighting on runways is what I'm talking about, really. Do you know what I mean? It would be sort of in the airport terminal, fine, yeah, no problem. But just outside and runways, yeah, it's a whole other kettle of fish in terms of liability. That's all.
To answer the general question about whether more in the lighting industry are actually sort of willing to consider remanufactured products, we've been in conversation with some fairly large architectural and development and developers who are absolutely talking about the possibility of using remanufactured products or remanufacturing existing products. So I think this is growing. It's going to get bigger. There are going to be more opportunities commercially for lighting manufacturers to get involved in it, and that's one of the reasons why we're running that workshop on how to set up lighting remanufacture next month. So yeah, I think this is coming.
Good stuff. Phil Muir is asking, how are products tested and certified for compliance if a representative sample hasn't been removed from the site and tested in a laboratory? And Simon, I'm going to pick you. Oh, sorry, David, you can.
I can't say. We treat every product that we're reusing as brand new. So the only parts that are reused generally are the back box, and there might be a front frame per se, but that's the inert parts. Everything else that goes into that creates a brand new product. So from warranty points of view, everything is warranted as if it were brand new. But when it comes to compliance and conformance, then we run a virtual reality software system that creates LDT files, which we can check to within 5%. And if the client wants, we'll send a product off to be photometrically tested if that's the requirement. We believe the virtual reality software is that good, but if they want it sent off, then we'll get it tested in the same way as a non-standard product would be. So not necessarily bespoke, because that's a different planet. But if you're refurbishing thousands of something, then that product would be sent off, tested, so as it ticks up. Because as John made the point, we don't make one mistake really. We make thousands if we get something wrong, but it has to be treated as a brand new product.
But to Phil's point, that's exactly the reason why we have a fairly hard and fast rule about obtaining a sample from site, so that we can do that kind of due diligence.
Yeah.
It's very, very rarely. And the Ali Pali job is an instance where we couldn't take a complete unit away. We could take a head unit and do as much due diligence as possible. And the net result was that we just went overkill on the gasketing to avoid water getting into it.
Yeah. There was a point just came up on my screen, John, Ray, regarding the question was about electrical safety and compliance. And again, because anything that is converted, I'm sure I speak for John and Simon on this, anything that we convert and adapt and reuse, it goes through every test that a brand new product would go through. So there is never a risk, and everything every product we make from new is tested, and every product we reuse is tested. So I hope that I just saw it come up on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, he was clarifying it. I mean, I think he's asking, do you take away your or put it in a lab, go through all the usual stuff you would do, put your CE mark, your brand, your warranty on it at the end? That's his question, I think.
Yeah, completely.
John touched on it earlier in terms of it's a question of liability at the end of the day, and the kind of attitude you may choose to take for converting a couple of light fittings in an underpass to converting 25,000 light fittings in Canary Wharf may be slightly different. You may not put it through the whole regulatory testing process, for a couple of light fittings, and that's fundamentally how are you going to cover your liability in that instance?
And that, Simon, is no different from what happens with new fittings, isn't it? Because many manufacturers will have thousands of different products and product families. They don't test every single product within a family for EMC, safety, etc. They take a risk-based approach, and so there's no difference between taking that risk-based approach for new products that there is also for remanufactured products.
Yeah, I mean, we try and mitigate some of that risk by innovation. So you saw on a couple of the slides kind of a reference to like a resus, which looked like a lamp, but actually it's a luminaire we've developed that sits in the same space as a fluorescent and wires back to a remote driver. Now in that instance, we're mitigating some of that risk because we've got, we're operating the same real estate. The driver typically, an LED driver is typically smaller than the fluorescent, or at least the same size as the fluorescent we're replacing it with. So we're just trying to go down that process of mitigating risk associated with remanufacture and make it as safe as possible in all possible.
Well, I was going to say, Simon, but with the LED boards and the drivers, like from Osram and Tridonic, they already have certificates already as well.
Yeah.
As a standalone.
You'd have loved resus, Sacha, in that project, right? Because you didn't have to do all that stuff with lead tape. You could have just bought resus and fitted it into the same lamp holders. But
yeah, next time.
There's always the next one, right?
Yeah.
So if you just want to explain, Simon, resus is one of these new generation of the kind of lamp luminaire hybrids that you basically, it's like a LED tube, but it's not. It's a luminaire that looks like a tube, and you plug it in.
Yeah, we use Tridonic at the moment. This is Tridonic boards that sit in the real estate. Yeah, the one common denominator of all fluorescent products is the lamp. The metalwork can change, the louver can be different, the diffuser can be different, but the common denominator is the lamp. So we took that and said, okay, well let's put LEDs in a housing that sits within T5 T8 structure. We 3D print the end caps, so we can choose to have an end cap on that's for a T5 lamp, an end cap on that goes onto a T8 lamp holder. In that matter, we can also then change that end cap and 3D print separate brackets to mount to specific bits of metalwork, but the driver is always remote, so that we're then control agnostic, we're emergency agnostic, and we're just de-risking all of that kind of everything from the luminaire down, and we just use the lamp holders as a mechanical location point.
And Simon, we're getting questions about branding. When, for instance, in the Arup project, what brand was on those luminaires once they were refurbished?
Regen Initiative,
the Regen Initiative.
Lighting.
Okay. And same question to you, Sacha. Is there a brand on those luminaires that have been reworked then in the Westminster office?
Yeah, they're all Osram modules, Osram diodes.
Yeah.
Osram chips.
Okay. So they stand over there. Okay, good. We've got about 10 minutes. So can we talk a little bit more about margins? Do you have to include intelligence controls to make the numbers work, or is a straight refurb gonna cut it? David.
Can you say that again? I'm not sure.
Do you need, to make the comparison numbers stack up between, putting in new luminaires and refurbishing and reconditioning and remanufacturing luminaires? How do you find that it works in terms of the margins? Does that stack up in front of a client, or do you need to say, justified by adding in controls or intelligence in some way?
Yeah, generally the projects we've done have full lighting control systems in the DALI system in there generally at the moment. What we find, of course, is that some of the projects at Canary Wharf that we're doing, where it's all very standard, 600 squares in 750 tiles. It's so easy to check what lumen output we're getting, what lux levels we're getting, and compare that to a new LED product or a reused LED product. But something Simon mentioned earlier, what was it? He said about reduced up. It was about reducing the quantity of products. Sometimes, obviously, that's a good way of reduction of everything. But from a layout point of view, generally down there where we do a lot, they say, no, we want the same number, but we'd rather you turn the wick down by 30-40% even to reduce the lumen output, to keep the correct, if they want their average 400 across the desk, that's what we can give them. So there's never an occasion there isn't one out there that we haven't achieved at least the light levels of the existing with LED, because it is just so much more efficient and more suited to lighting downward. That's what it's built to do.
Yeah.
It's the energy savings that are the kind of the care.
Yeah, if I jump in, right, I'd just say sometimes, I mean, because I've obviously come from a lighting and controls background, so I'm quite au fait with controls, and a lot of people are generally in the lighting industry sometimes siloed in lighting controls or lighting. Do you know what I mean? So there's kind of not really too much of a crossover. But what I find sometimes is you can be too keen and you muddy the water maybe a little bit with controls. Do you know what I mean? So the client had a budget of 10 grand, and all of a sudden you add some controls and it might be 15 grand or something like that, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like you know what I mean? And it can be a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes. You know what I mean? If you add controls, most of my projects though fortunately have been, they haven't got controls, they want to implement something, and we just end up coming up with some sort of idea, do you know what I mean, to make even greater energy savings, which is fine. It's just lighting people generally deal with lighting, and controls people generally deal with controls, and that's the just some part of the industry sometimes, you know what I mean? So it's a bit rare, but there's people like Tridonic who've got controls in their OEM packages that can help traditional lighting companies out. So you know what I mean? So there's definitely, if a lighting company hasn't got the skills for it, they can definitely ask, such companies like Philips, Tridonic, whatever, and they can come up with a solution. I know wireless emergency stuff is big at the moment, and there's a lot of companies out there that will do wireless emergency monitoring, and that's sort of another sort of string to the bow for lighting companies maybe, but it's that's sort of, there's always pitfalls with everything, but it's a lot of positives, but there's always something you've got to watch out for. So yeah, it's interesting. You know what I mean? So it does add some value, but controls is never. It's only ever going to be about 20-30% of the lighting value. Yeah. So it's a lot of hassle for for lighting companies to deal with, because it's a lot of effort for not so much reward, and that's the other issue.
I did a piece of work just before jumping on this call where I looked at 10 or so projects and looked at the kind of blended averages with regards to a few things really. Carbon avoidance, the blended average over 10 jobs was just short of 63%. The energy reduction 51.5%, and the waste mitigation 87-ish%. So that energy reduction was just pure kind of fluorescent to LED, or SON to traditional lamp to LED, and that was without the additional benefits. I think I alluded to it when I was talking about Arup London, in the fact they're just sort of now enabled all the daylight linking, and they're seeing kind of an additional 20% of headroom in the energy benefit from around 50% up to around 70%. They only turned it on last weekend, so they're just monitoring the numbers. But it's I think it's good, because actually if we're reporting numbers just on traditional to LED benefits, then actually anything on top is is just cream on the top of the cake. So.
Yeah.
A few people are asking the same question, which is, you know, what motivates a customer to choose a remanufactured product over new? Is it sustainability? Is it price? Is it a mixture? Is it whatever? So,
well, our ROI used to be the only metric that people talked through, and I think it's really encouraging that whilst, you know, return on investment is an important factor, still it's not the only factor, you know, and environmental metrics and ESG and CSR reporting are, you know, they're beginning to have as much weight, particularly for the larger clients. I mean, a lot of the projects we've, you know, that have been discussed on the call today are for bigger corporations, right? And they now have a commitment to report their corporate social responsibilities and how they're going to get their path to net zero. And so you know, it's really encouraging that they are important metrics to customers now, and I think that will only grow as time moves on, and particularly as things like carbon taxation, which will inevitably land with us, emerges. You know, people are going to just not talk about return on investment.
I think you're absolutely right, Simon. I also think it's what we do, what FD do, what John does, what you do, is still a best kept secret out there. The amount of people that I discuss it with, go, I've never heard of this. And I think, have you been living under a rock for the last 5-10 years? But the fact is that there doesn't seem to be any interest in the media, because it's generally quite good news and it's helping, and they don't sort of like that. But I do think that these types of webinars, perhaps more presentations, more work with our PR companies to spread this word out there, because there are still people who have no idea that building owners are people who've got 20-year leases left with fluorescent lighting in it. And it is how we inform them that there is a payback, of course, as well. So most blue chips, most large corporations, they'll tick a box if they can for social and corporate responsibilities. But the first box they've got to tick is the balance sheet. And if we can do that whilst helping them with their corporate and social responsibilities, I think we are the pioneers of this on this call. There are other companies doing it. We know that. There's loads of companies out there doing it. But doing it at the levels we all do in our own sectors, it needs to be, you need to tell more people, Ray.
Yeah, well, we're doing, Recolight and myself, we're doing our best, but it's you're right. I was with an architect the other day, and he was like, you know, people don't know about reuse hubs, they don't know about the remanufacturing sector, they just don't know that it's a thing. And really, if we can just get that on their radar, that this stuff happens, and there's success stories, and there's great projects like we've seen today, that can only help. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there, guys. We're at the half hour. Just to put on your radar, we're talking about bioplastics and the use of those 3D printing in luminaires, and that is at 11 o'clock on the Thursday, the 20th of June. So register for that. Recolight website, follow the links. Really interesting discussion today. We had lots of questions, lots of comments. Could have gone on much longer, but there you go. Thank you, David, John, Sacha, Simon, and Nigel. And thank you, Suzanne, in the background, for making it all go so smoothly. We'll see you again on the 20th of June. Thank you.
And thank you, Ray, on behalf of everybody who's listened in, for handling the whole thing so elegantly. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure with you guys. Well, have a great rest of your day.